Here in the dark, eerie and spooky forests of North Rhine-Westphalia, Germanic tribes supposedly inflicted a severe defeat on the Romans more than 2,000 years ago. And the Germans have erected a statue in monument to their hero, Arminius, chieftain of the Germanic Cherusci tribe. Once the largest statue in the world, it was built in the 19th century on the land of a noble dynasty, the counts, princes and lords of Lippe. And now I'm going to visit them in Detmold, northwestern Germany. The Lippe Regional Church, the Lippe Regional Museum, the Lippe Regional Theatre. And here, in the middle of the city, is the castle. Namely the Detmold Residential Castle, which has been the home of the Lippe royal family for centuries. Its location in the middle of the city also says a lot about how closely the family and the people here in Lippe have been connected throughout history, even to today. 800 years of one family and one country. And here is how the latest leader of the estate, Prince Stephan, came to Lippe, a lawyer with his own law firm. I brought you something. As well as the huge camera team.
Yes, I can see that.
I've brought something else too. Can I take you to the car?
Please.
Our souvenir. A beech tree for the forest here.
Thank you very much.
The forest plays a special role in the life of Prince Stephan of Lippe, but we'll get to that later. We are interested in how the royal family relates to the state of Lippe and to Arminius, who has become a kind of symbol. This is really clear as I come into the ancestral hall here, because there are many of your ancestors whose names are related to the Germanic Hermann version of the name Arminius. Your father is called Armin. Is there a tradition of passing down the name?
Well, Bernhard and Hermann are Old Saxon names, and the Saxons are, of course, the successors of the local tribes existing around the birth of Christ. So there is some kind of connection, because we can clearly trace ourselves back to this Saxon tribal history, and the names are more or less coincidental.
Except for your father.
Well, yes. At that time, that was somewhat an influence. Armin was a name which was given as a reference to the Cheruscan princes.
And Stephan?
It's just a modern name. I think my parents didn't want to choose conservative names and simply went the other way and chose a name that was popular at the time.
Totally 60s.
Exactly.
Prince Stephan was born in 1959 as the only son of Princess Traute and Prince Armin. Happy family pictures were captured from early on, a family tradition. And we are also about to be welcomed by the parents too. Traute, Princess of Lippe, and Armin, Prince of Lippe, who live in a private part of the Detmold Castle, which was built in the 16th century. As I learned today, everything is always a four-wing system. In the architectural style of the so-called Weisse, Renaissance, not just an impressively large castle when viewed from above. How did you manage to communicate in the house? By calling out from one side to the other? Well, why else do we have mobile phones? Yes, but the way you imagine it, with so many staff here, you can't believe it. There really aren't that many staff here. No. Above all, we have a number of ladies who are only here in the morning, and who are all gone by now. That's why it's me pouring you a cup of tea, if you'd like one. Yes, please. The family spends most of their time looking after the castle. They don't get any subsidies, and so maintenance requires everyone's energy, even if you're technically retired.
If the caretaker lived with us, we wouldn't even notice a lot of things. The family themselves, especially the princess, walk around the house a lot and see everything. She sees whether something is broken, whether the window is open, whether the light has been left on. She sees it all.
A life's work.
If the family didn't live there, we wouldn't definitely need at least 1 or 2 housekeepers.
A great deal of the castle is open to the public and has been for many years now. Around 30,000 visitors a year take advantage of the opportunity and come to Detmold Castle. No one in the family dreads bumping into visitors. How cute is it? With castle tours like this, it's a bonus when the children can meet you too. Yes, of course. You always hope so.
Sometimes they're stood outside. If it's a school in Lippe that was brought here, then someone somehow always recognizes us, and they start waving, and we wave back.
Do the children here in Detmold, or at least the Lippe children, know how to address you? Do they know what the customs are? They say princess, and that's it. But luckily children are very unbiased, and it's very sweet. So basically, I really enjoy doing it. Following tradition, you wouldn't be Princess and Prince Armin, but you would actually have the ruling title of Fürst of Lippe, right? But that's no longer common in your family to be known like that.
No, in his will, my father named me as the successor and expressly requested I call myself by that title. And 6 months later, I got a notice from the Minister of the Interior that the name for me and everyone else should be Prince, because the Fürst was the ruling prince.
Because in the case of your family, it isn't just an aristocratic title, but also a quasi-professional title among the population.
If it were a ruler, then yes, like it would have been with my father, who was still the ruling prince.
And the Fürst directed the country's fortunes from here until the revolution in 1918. Even today, the roots of the history can be seen in how the Lippe region is run. The family had an open house policy even 100 years ago.
Here we show 12 halls in Detmold Castle, which my grandfather opened to the public at the beginning of the 20th century.
Why did he do that? It was unusual back then, no?
Well, we can't ask him anymore, but I think there was a certain pressure as people would say, yes, we would like to see that, and it wasn't as if we had a huge stream of tourists. But if anyone was interested, a designated servant would come and guide the interested tourists through these rooms, which we still see today, and which also look the same as they did 100 years ago.
And that was still without a ticket booth.
I don't know if they paid admission, but the servant was probably paid individually.
And your grandfather was Leopold IV. It really struck me that he was the only ruling prince we had in North Rhine-Westphalia.
Yes, he was the only one in North Rhine-Westphalia. Otherwise, the region was a Prussian province, if I might put it that way. So, if you look at an old map, you'll see a large Prussian map. You'll see a huge, typically blue sea of Prussia, with a small white spot in the middle. And that was the state of Lippe, which was independent until 1947.
In 1947, the state of Lippe gave up its independence under pressure from the British occupying forces. But Lippe could decide who they wanted to belong to, Lower Saxony or North Rhine-Westphalia. Lippe chose North Rhine-Westphalia, and the Lippe Rose became part of the state's coat of arms. However, the small Lippe does not make up part of the state's name. What role did your grandfather have as a ruling prince under the Kaiser?
That's effectively what makes a prime minister today. There was a federal council, and there the ruling princes had different votes depending on their size. Ultimately, like today, the federal council and Lippe had a voice. So my grandfather, who died in 1949, I never lived to see him. I only know him from his stories. In the middle there is his first wife here. She died in 1919, right after the revolution, when it was quite a bad time. People say it was due to the Spanish influenza or tuberculosis, a disease from which many people died during that time. And then is his second wife, my grandmother, Anna, who died in 1980, and who I still personally have very vivid memories of, and who I got most of the stories I know from.
Grandmother and grandson, captured on family film from the 1960s. Film treasures, but for the Prince of Lippe there are many older treasures too.
My grandfather was a photographer and also made films and won prizes as a photographer. And of course that was, I would say, today it might not be anything special anymore, but in the first 20 years of the 20th century, when photography was in its infancy, it was somehow already a very extraordinary genre.
And so Prince Leopold had already documented his own coronation in 1905. But he also had fun with the production.
And he also directed and created small slapstick scenes with his family. I think that was his great hobby and passion.
Also as a leading actor. The whole family had to join in. In private, they seem completely natural. Here are the sons from the first marriage. And here is the one from the second, Prince Armin, with one of his brothers. So how did you come across your father's films?
Well, they were sometimes shown here when I was a child. The setup was practically the same as it is today. There was the cinema apparatus, which you worked by hand.
Yes, and there is a film labelled. I'm not actually supposed to tell you about it. That's Prince Armin on the rocking horse, and he is so tiny. Already a serene little royal highness.
It was a very harmonious family life. My father sometimes read from joke books. He was actually a very humorous person, although his humor was not shown everywhere in official settings.
What do you know about your grandfather? He had experienced the revolution, the First World War, the Second World War, everything. What marks has your grandfather left?
I often find them through buildings. You can tell a lot from buildings. So, for example, he rebuilt the theatre that burned down in 1912, and he rebuilt it during the years 1914 to 18, during the wartime. And I think that rebuilding a theatre in the wartime is a very special achievement. He also then built the Christ Church, which still exists. Then he made land and money available for the Jewish synagogue. People say that when it was burned down, he cried. But he simply built a lot, and therefore you can feel his influence through the landscape of the city.
The Duke of Lippe not only shaped the city of Detmold, but also the entire region. After the abdication in 1919, In addition to architectural monuments and cultural assets, they also left a large forest to the state of Lippe. Only 1/4 remained in the family's possession. But this forest became a problem child because of its location in the middle of the Teutoburg Forest, which North Rhine-Westphalia wanted to turn into a national park. Without management, nature in a national park is left to its own devices. However, the royal house did not want to make the remaining parts of its forest available for this.
We are actually convinced that we can do it very well here ourselves, both in terms of maintaining the castle and the forest. And maybe we'll consider it again sometime. We have had the forest in the family for over 1,000 years.
It is a well-structured and species-rich forest. The national park managers wanted to create a sort of gentle tourist magnet by converting it into natural wilderness. The royal house argues that parts of the forest are already currently under protection.
Here, for example, you can see what we understand to be natural forestry, namely old beech trees, including a lot of good density and natural regeneration. And this is what an optimally maintained forest looks like to us. But this is actually a maintained situation. It's not like this naturally.
And if you were to convert the forest into a national park, it would actually be depriving you of your livelihood.
Yes, it would deprive us of our financial livelihood because the forest is mainly used to maintain the castle. But here, too, we would be deprived of our emotional life's purpose, which is an equally important argument.
And what support do you receive from your wife in terms of the national park?
Well, firstly, a great moral support. She is my conversation partner, my sparring partner, with whom I discuss everything that happens, and also discuss everything we do to see whether it makes sense, if it's good or bad, and whether to do it or not.
Members of the nobility were included in the guest list for their wedding in 1994, including Aunt Juliana, once Queen of the Netherlands. The bride is Countess Maria of Solms-Laubach from Hesse. Today, the family lives in Villa Chance, a property belonging to the estate. In answering the question of the national park, she is firm in opposition. For us, this is a very existential question. Yes, we manage this forest and live from it, like you said. It maintains the castle. You couldn't finance such a huge castle without a counterweight such as this. And I always have the feeling that people pretend that, oh, there can still be a forest like this, and why doesn't he give up the forest to protect the nature? But you could just as easily argue that yes, we'll do without the forest, but it is part of our existence. We need it. A few months ago, there was a little heat here in Detmold, as demonstrators took to the streets against it. A few thousand people gathered to demonstrate against the national park, and it was you stood at the forefront of the demonstration. I was more in the middle. I simply joined all these demonstrators who are all of the same mind. It really was enormous and impressive to see it all. How many people were willing to take to the streets for it? Because the royal family would not be the only ones affected, East Westphalia Lippe is centre of the wood processing industry. For farmers, sawmill workers, and even the Taxpayers Association, the national park would throw a spanner in the works. But there are also numerous supporters who want a national park full of flora and fauna. We think that it is an opportunity for our region. We would be totally stupid to miss it. And we want to do everything we can to ensure that the park happens because it's a great idea, which we could all benefit from. In January 2012, the dispute grew harsher. It is one of the largest demonstrations which has ever taken place in Detmold. I also had a placard made especially, and the children built their own placards. We then went with the demonstration around the city holding them. What was written on your placard? I just had a picture. And the children? They just wrote quite a simple, "National Park is stupid." In the end, the region was divided. The Prince of Lippe rejected the exchange of his forest and special rights. The Lippe Regional Association, the largest among the Teutoburg Forest owners, couldn't reach an agreement with the state of North Rhine-Westphalia for legal and economic reasons. Municipalities involved were withdrawing. An arbitrator was involved, but all in vain. In December 2012, the Teutoburg Forest National Park plans were buried. But the forest is not only an object of contention, it is also an architectural jewel. High on the hill's ridge in the Teutoburg Forest sits the Falcon Castle, which Prince Stephan holds particularly close to his heart.
The Falcon Schloss is our main castle, which Bernard II built in 1195, and which, if you like, is the cornerstone of the sovereignty in Lippe, and therefore also the cornerstone and foundation of our family.
Sort of like the cradle of the family.
Yes, exactly. And this castle was a masterpiece of fortification engineering. No one ever conquered it. At some point it became uncomfortable and was simply left. It has now collapsed, and it is our job now. I'd like to say it's my heartfelt concern to make it visible again, to research the history.
And one day it will be something like Machu Picchu in Peru, where you can walk through a sort of ancient Incan city. Here you will be able to walk through the old castle.
I hope so.
Work on the Falkenburg has been going on for 8 years. With funding from the federal state, the Westphalia Lippe Regional Association, and with the support of the owner, archaeologists, excavators, technicians and restorers, work is being carried out to repair the medieval castle. Astonishing discoveries have been made in the process.
I'll start with this. It's a Vera icon. It's a pilgrim symbol, and you may have heard of the Shroud of Turin, something that reappeared in Rome in the middle of the 14th century in 1350, was exhibited, and the noble gentleman set off on pilgrimage to Rome and viewed this shroud. And then you received a pilgrim symbol with the face of Christ from the Pope's hand, as a token saying that you were there. For me, this is one of the most fascinating finds we have made.
It's really a rarity.
This here is a fragment of a gold chess piece. Here, in gold, is part of the crown which he probably wore throughout his lifetime. This was worn as a pendant, and you can recognize quite clearly the 5 petals of the Lippe Rose. This one is a restored wolfsangle.
What is a wolfsangle?
It is a lure used to catch wolves, so you have to imagine that on these spikes, meat was skewered. This one was hung in a tree or buried on a chain somewhere on the ground. The wolf came, smelled the meat, swallowed it, and then hung on the hook, like a fish on a rod.
So not a very pleasant death, probably.
Yes, it would probably go against animal protection laws to do this today.
Fishing for wolves?
Yes, we only knew about this from literature about medieval hunting, where it was described, but before this one we had never found a real wolfsangle. This was found in the castle in 2009 in a cellar that we excavated. There were 24 of these on the cellar floor. This is where the king of the castle sits.
Please can you explain for me again why this was most likely the dungeon, or the pantry?
It was both.
But wouldn't the supplies be stolen?
No, there would be a latch to secure the supplies with the door, and you can see 2 heavy bars on the masonry here, also with a space for a lock, literally under lock and key. So that was a door which was heavily fortified and closed from the outside. Whoever was in here had no chance of getting out.
Many people had no chance of getting in either, even if they tried with all their might. The castle was besieged twice in the 15th century unsuccessfully. Was it necessary to have such thick walls?
Yes, if a castle such as this would be shot at with things like catapults, they can zero in with pinpoint accuracy and definitely get through the thin walls.
Who were the enemies of the rulers at that time in Lippe?
The battle opponent was the Duke of Braunschweig-Lüneburg.
The ancestors of Ernst August of Hanover. In the 16th century, the family moved down to Detmold, to the larger and more comfortable residential castle. How did you actually learn about the history of your house?
It was sort of gradually, playfully even. I used to supplement my holiday salary by doing castle tours, and I'd also like to say that yes, I know at least the basics of the history.
Well, go on then.
It begins with Bernhard VII, who was nicknamed the Warlike. Simon Heinrich here lived at the time of the Great Elector. It looks a bit like that too. Tsar Peter the Great was here, and they organised a free shooting. The Tsar then said to Friedrich Adolf, "Sire, you are too big for your country." Then you also have to ask, was Lippe practically bankrupt? They had Greece syndrome. In addition to this oldest savings bank in Germany, this Simon August also founded one of the oldest fire insurance companies. The Lippe Fire Insurance Company still exists today. But if we move on now to our most famous ruler, then that would be Princess Pauline. Pauline went to Paris herself and impressed Napoleon so much that Napoleon said that Lippe could remain independent.
So Princess Pauline is remarkable for showing so much statesmanship for a woman in this position.
She was, if you will, an early example of emancipation. And when the men are away and the women are working, the same problem still occurs today. What about the children? Princess Pauline also recognized this and founded the first kindergarten in Detmold, the first in Germany.
They all looked good, your ancestors.
This is my great-grandfather, Leopold's father. This is actually a historic gramophone, which was at the time extremely modern, because people used to have ones with huge funnels. So this funnel goes downwards with a more modern design and comes out here. So it's a real home setup dating to Berlin from the First World War. So when you've finished, you raise this and then, all mechanical, now the mechanical belt is running.
The fingerprints of history can still very much be seen at the Detmold Castle. But life in a castle also has its downsides. So are there any spiders or creatures lurking up there amongst the stucco or around the openings to the organ pipes?
Yes, of course. There is also a problem with bats, a huge problem.
How come they cause such a big issue? Are they a protected species?
They trigger the alarm systems when they fly around.
Where do they fly?
They fly here, through the room.
But not through this one.
I'm not sure.
But surely not where people are living.
Well, yes, of course. They just live in the different cavities. There are some quite big ones, about this big inside. People used to like to do ghost tours for school or college friends, and then the bats go like this to fly into people.
In the hair, I've always heard they can get caught when they fly into your hair.
They don't get caught, but they do make you duck. They're really quite big, about the size of a pigeon.
And did the people find it funny?
The boys, yes.
There is even something funny to see in the cellar, apparently. I just hope it doesn't move. Can I blow the dust off? I don't really want to. It's probably as valuable as the bottle. 1748 Rudesheim. This is a white wine. And have you ever opened one of these bottles?
A Riesling, yes. Yes, I have.
Was there still alcohol inside?
Yes, there was still alcohol in it. But I would say, of course, it tastes a bit like an old sherry. When you open it, the scent of 1748 hits you suddenly. But then it goes away quickly. So it's a very floral wine scent. And what's left is like an old port wine. Old Fritz may have drunk exactly this wine. That's what's special about it. Would you like to take a wine with you as a souvenir?
I'd love to. I didn't dare to ask. Wonderful, 2005.
Yes, more modern.
I am so scared now that you've told me about the bats. No, so it's not an ancestor or... it's newspapers.
Yes, so we keep old newspapers in here.
Honestly, I'm not as brave as you to reach into here.
Are you worried about picking up a bat?
Yes. Oh, how pretty. And there with the Lippe Rose.
It says here the oldest and most widespread newspaper in the Free State and its neighbouring districts. I'm also seeing this for the first time. So it was from the 19th of October, 1919, the Lippe regional paper.
That's a time when your grandfather had just been abdicated. And here the wines were probably wrapped up in there.
Probably, exactly.
Here it is. It talks about his severance pay. Maybe there are documents that your grandfather kept because of the upheaval after the abdication.
I rather think that the wine was kept here to drown his sorrows. After the abdication, I have all his diaries. I have found entries from the 6th of December, the day the Lippe battalion arrived here to the barracks, and the revolutionary government, the new one, wanted to capture him immediately. And the commander got wind of it. He had the train stopped ahead of Detmold. The soldiers got out and marched in order via a detour to Schlossplatz. Yes, it was a huge impression to see the palace square filled with people, and it brought a cheer to my father, I believe. And then, he writes, it would have been one of the hardest hours of his life not being allowed to answer.
The times have changed. Prince Leopold remained true to his hobby, filmmaking. He managed his remaining assets, and with the severance pay he purchased, among other things, the Villa Schanze, taking care of his family. But the two sons from his first marriage caused him grief as they turned to National Socialism. How did your father deal with this enormous friction between the siblings? So on the one hand, they were the brothers who were members of the Nazi Party and who were very loyal to the regime. And then on the other hand, they were the complete opposite.
I think he was very pleased that I didn't go along with it. And with my brothers, there was a big argument between them and my father. I can't exactly remember the argument anymore. All I can remember is that my mother said about the SA leader, Ernst Röhm, "If the old Ernst arrives, slam the doors shut."
Soon, Nazi Germany invaded Poland. The Second World War broke out.
To me, it was a disaster. I saw it as a catastrophe, influenced by my mother, of course. This led to the fact that when the others, for example, registered as officer candidates, it was out of the question for me. I didn't want to become Hitler's officer.
But he couldn't escape military service completely. Prince Armin enlisted in the Air Force as an ordinary soldier. After the war, Prince Leopold faced consequences. The castle, the fortune, the forest. He now wanted to run his estate differently. His brother's political views also prompted their father to change his will.
Yes. He sent a note somewhere explaining that he was changing his will and why.
Contrary to tradition, Prince Leopold named his youngest son, Prince Armin, as heir. In 1949, Prince Leopold died. Your father died. You were in your mid-20s, and then as a young man you were suddenly responsible for the entire estate and the family. How was that for you?
It was a real shock, actually.
Had you prepared at all?
No, my father had never spoken to me about it before. I wanted to finish my studies.
The study of biology. Whilst there, he met a student, Teutoburg. Her middle-class background was no obstacle for Prince Armin of Lippe. Basically, we both got PhDs on plants and physiology. And this is how our story developed. And here we are now. They have been living happily in Detmold for 60 years. The Hermann city in the middle of the Lippe region.
That's something very special. In general, the whole royal family in Lippe, you don't feel an unpleasant presence at all, but rather as a part of what belongs to the region. And it's all connected to the history. And the sympathy ratings are still very high for the royal family.
The royal family is very committed, and above all, they love the theatre.
They are all supporters of the theatre and members of the Theatre Association. So the family's commitment is there, and there is also a very high emotional identification with this state theatre. Prince Armin also said once that if there was a financial crisis here, then he would speak up for the theatre. You notice that bond is very close and emotionally connected.
And it should stay that way. Lippe and its royal family have a history that not only knows the past, but also the future.
Prince Stephan also has children, and the eldest son is 17, and the young Prince Bernhard is also a great young man. So their future is also secured. Not much can go wrong, hopefully. if we continue as we have for the last 50 years.
The royal couple have 5 children. This is the 28th generation in the history of the Lippe family. I believe and hope that the children will grow into this role in a normal way. They are aware of it already, but it isn't something which we constantly discuss in that sense. I want the children, and also our eldest son, to not base their careers and life plans on this, but for them to do what they believe in and enjoy. Very close to Villa Schanze is the open-air museum of the Westphalia Lippe Regional Association, a popular excursion destination. This is the coach driver, Margaret First. Germany's largest open-air museum promises a variety of experiences all year round. There are over 90 hectares which house historic buildings, gardens and fields. There are plenty of animals, geese, pigs and even donkeys. Do you come here often with the children? Yes, quite often. Today, for example, our daughter is here with her school class, coincidentally. But we also come here privately a lot too. Is your daughter with those children there? One project lies particularly close to Prince Stephan's heart. Since 2001, the museum has been actively involved in the preservation of Senna horses, the oldest breed in Germany.
They are working horses. They're kept wild and come, I would say, from the wild, but they have been carefully bred. They were sought after as military horses in the 19th century, and there was a prince from Lippe who was also an absolute horse lover, the son of Prince Pauline. He cared for these horses in the 19th century in Bad Meinberg. You know the name Rosskur? It comes from the history of these horses.
Do you hear that? It's a Senna horse. The professionals do, so Dr. Carsten can... The first of these horses was also mentioned in documents sometime in the 12th century. This means that the horses are the same age as the family here.
Even older. So this is the oldest horse breed in Germany, and we can say that rightly with great pride.
And what really defines a Senna horse is the pedigree.
It's the pedigree, the family tree, the genetics. And there is an association of Senna breeders who also ensure that only the right stallions are used for breeding, and that breed characteristics are strictly adhered to.
A bit like the nobility too, with a family tree which likes to stick to itself.
I'm not sure I would want to compare nobility with breeding a species, though.
9 fowls have been born in the open-air museum in recent years. Prince Stephan named each one. Lippe and its royal house, an aristocratic dynasty that still shapes this region of North Rhine-Westphalia today.